Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the next pirate king in One Piece's Grand Line. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was screaming, not with sound, but with the violent tearing of reality itself. The air in the Muzidafu Industrial Park warped and shimmered like a heat haze over asphalt, but this was a cold, terrifying distortion. Buildings bent at impossible angles, their steel skeletons groaning in protest. The sky, once a placid blue, was now a swirling vortex of nauseating colors, sickly violet, bruised purple, and an angry, venomous green that reminded Izuku Midoriya of his own crackling power. Deku! Get back! His quirk is going critical! Ochako Uraraka's voice, usually a beacon of warmth, was strained with panic. She was touching a massive chunk of levitating debris, her fingers white with the effort of keeping it from crashing down on a group of trapped civilians. The perimeter is compromised! Tenya Ida's voice boomed, his engines flaring as he zipped between falling girders, pulling people from the path of destruction. We must contain the villain before the entire district collapses. The villain in question, a man calling himself Paradox, was laughing, a wild, unhinged sound that grated on Izuku's nerves. His body was a focal point of the chaos, energy pouring from him in waves. His quirk, Chronorupture, allowed him to fray the edges of space-time, and right now, he was tearing a hole straight through it. You heroes! You think you can cage a god? Paradox shrieked, his eyes wide and manic. I'll unmake this world! I'll show you true chaos! Izuku's mind raced, his analytical brain working in overdrive even as One for All coursed through him at a stable 45%. Green lightning danced across his skin, the power a familiar and comforting thrum beneath his bones. He saw the patterns, the fluctuations in the villain's energy output. It was a tantrum, a final, desperate act of a cornered man. A suicidal one. He's not targeting us anymore, Izuku realized with a jolt of ice-cold dread. He's targeting himself. He's trying to implode, and he'll take everything with him. A black spot began to form in Paradox's chest, a void that didn't reflect light but drank it. It was small, no bigger than a fist, but it was growing, pulling at the distorted reality around it with an inexorable, hungry force. The screams of warping metal were replaced by a low, terrifying hum, the sound of nothingness being born. Uraraka! Ida! Get everyone out! Now! Izuku yelled, his voice cutting through the din. He didn't wait for a response. He pushed One for All higher, feeling the familiar strain in his muscles, the exhilarating burn of power threatening to overwhelm him. 50%. 55. He had to get to the epicenter. He had to stop the collapse. He launched himself forward, a green comet against a backdrop of cosmic horror. The gravitational pull from the void was immense, tugging at him, trying to peel the air from his lungs. He could see Uraraka struggling to keep her footing, Ida's recipro burst barely managing to fight the inward pull. They were too close. I'm sorry, All Might, he whispered, the words whipped away by the roaring vortex. I might have to break myself again for this one. He was almost there. Paradox's face was a mask of ecstatic madness. The void was the size of a beach ball now, and the pull was so strong that Izuku had to anchor his feet with every bound, his reinforced soles screeching against the pavement. He reared his fist back for a Delaware smash, aiming not at the villain, but at the air just beside him. A concussive blast might disrupt the quirk's focus, cause it to destabilize prematurely, but then he saw it. A flicker of movement behind him. Uraraka had lost her grip, her body tumbling through the air, pulled directly toward the vortex. Ida, changing direction mid-sprint, was racing to intercept her, but the pull was too strong. They were both going to be sucked in. In that fraction of a second, every lesson, every fight, every broken bone culminated in a single, absolute certainty. There was no choice to be made. There was only the action. His body, as it always had, moved on its own. He abandoned his attack, twisted in midair, and kicked off a warping lamppost. The force of the change in direction sent a lance of pain up his leg, but he ignored it. He was a green blur, a flash of heroic instinct. He slammed into Ida first, his momentum pushing his friend off his deadly trajectory. With his free hand, he snagged Uraraka's wrist, yanking her from the air. "DKU, no!" Uraraka screamed, her eyes wide with terror, as she realized what he had done. He used the last of his momentum to throw them, launching his two dearest friends away from the void, toward the relative safety of the collapsing perimeter. He saw their horrified faces receding, their mouths forming his name. For a moment, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had saved them. That's all that mattered. Then the void took him. It was not a sensation of being pulled, but of being unwritten. His senses dissolved first. Sight vanished into absolute blackness, sound into a crushing silence. The feeling of his own body, the familiar weight of his limbs and the lightning of one for all, evaporated. He was pure consciousness, adrift in a non-space between moments. Colors he had no name for flooded his mind's eye, the brilliant, burning gold of a sun setting on a sea of blood, the deep, impossible blue of the ocean floor, the emerald green of 1,000 forests. All at once, he felt a tearing sensation deep within his soul. It was a feeling of connection, a bond forged in blood, tears, and a single strand of hair, being stretched to its breaking point. He could feel the vestiges within him, the echoes of the previous users of One for All, screaming, their voices distant and fading, like a radio station losing its signal. Nana Shimura's gentle warmth, Yoichi's foundational spark, and All Might's blinding, sun-like presence, all of it was being pulled away, unraveling from his very being. The connection snapped. The pain was absolute. It was not physical, but existential. A core part of who he was, the part that made him a hero, the part that had fulfilled his lifelong dream, was gone. The void where One for All had resided was now just that, a void. Cold, empty, and silent. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. Sensation returned with the violence of a physical blow. First, the smell. An overpowering, thick aroma of salt, brine, and something vaguely fishy and unpleasant. Then sound, the rhythmic crash of waves and the shrill, lonely cry of some unknown bird. Then feeling, the coarse, grating texture of wet sand against his cheek and the searing heat of an unfamiliar sun on his back. Izuku Midoriya coughed, his body convulsing as he expelled a lumpful of salt water. The fluid burned his throat and sinuses, and he gasped for air, each breath a ragged, painful thing. He pushed himself up onto his hands and knees, his muscles screaming in protest. His hero costume was in tatters, the tough fabric ripped and frayed, exposing scraped and bruised skin beneath. He blinked, trying to clear the salt and the haze from his eyes. He was on a beach. A wide, white sand beach that stretched out in either direction, meeting a sea so vast and blue it seemed to swallow the sky. The sun was a brilliant, unforgiving white orb hanging high overhead. There were no skyscrapers, no familiar cityscapes, no sign of the battle or the vortex. Just the sea, the sand, and the sky. Uraraka! Ida! He rasped, his voice raw. He scanned the shoreline frantically, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was alone. They were safe. The thought brought a small, fleeting wave of relief that was immediately drowned by a tidal wave of panic. Where was he? He staggered to his feet, his body feeling unnaturally heavy, sluggish. His legs trembled, not just from exhaustion, but from a deep, profound weakness he hadn't felt in years. He looked down at his hands, expecting to see the faint, telltale scars and the familiar green sparks dancing over his knuckles. There was nothing. He tried to summon it. He closed his eyes, focusing, reaching for that inner wellspring of power, that roaring furnace that had become as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. He pushed, mentally and physically, bracing for the surge of energy, the familiar crackle. Nothing. A cold knot of dread formed in his stomach. No! He whispered. He tried again, harder this time. He clenched his fist, focusing all his will, all his desperation, into his right arm. Come on! Full calling, the silence in his soul was his only answer. The embers were gone. The voices of the vestiges were gone. The sunbright presence of All Might, which had been a constant comfort in the back of his mind, was gone. The connection he'd felt being torn away in that chaotic non-space, it hadn't just been damaged, it had been severed completely. Izuku fell to his knees in the sand, his breath hitching in his throat. He looked at his hands again, seeing them not as the tools of a hero, but as the weak, useless appendages of a quirkless boy. The reality crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs more effectively than any villain's punch. It was gone. One for all was gone. He was quirkless. Again. A choked sob escaped his lips, followed by another, and another, until he was weeping openly, his body shaking with the force of his grief. The tears streamed down his face, carving clean paths through the grime and sand. All his work, all his training, all of All Might's hopes and dreams, vanished. He had failed him. He had lost the sacred torch. He was nobody. Just a useless, quirkless Deku, stranded on an unknown beach in a world that was not his own. The lonely cries of the gulls overhead sounded like they were mocking him, and he curled into a ball on the sand, the vast, indifferent ocean his only witness as his world, for the second time in his life, came to a final, devastating end. Hours bled into one another under the relentless sun. Izuku's tears eventually ran dry, leaving him hollowed out, a vessel of despair and exhaustion. The initial, sharp agony of his loss had subsided into a dull, throbbing ache that was more terrifying in its permanence. He was adrift, not just physically but mentally, with no anchor to hold on to. Primal needs began to assert themselves over his grief. A burning thirst clawed at his throat, and his stomach twisted into a painful, empty knot. His body, no longer supercharged by One for All's immense energy reserves, was screaming for fuel. He knew, with a detached sort of clarity, that if he didn't find water and food soon, his despair would be the least of his problems. Using a piece of driftwood as a makeshift crutch, he forced his aching body to its feet. He turned his back on the endless ocean and faced inland. Beyond the beach rose a line of palm trees, and further on, he could see the whitewashed walls and red-tiled roofs of a town. Looming over it all was a massive, intimidating structure, a fortress of some kind, stark and gray, with a strange, jaw-like emblem on its main tower. It was unlike any architecture he had ever seen. The town was his only hope. He began to walk, each step a monumental effort. The hot sand gave way to a dusty, sun-baked road. The people he passed, and he passed very few, gave him wide berth, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. They were dressed strangely, in simple, almost old-fashioned clothes. No one had a smartphone. There were no cars, only a few horse-drawn carts. The entire place felt like it was plucked from a history book. He tried to ask for help, his Japanese meeting only blank, confused stares. They responded in a language he didn't understand, their words sharp and clipped. He was an outsider in every sense of the word, a freak in a tattered, futuristic green costume. His attempts to find aid were fruitless. Doors were shut in his face. People hurried away, muttering under their breath. The fear in this town was a palpable thing, thick and suffocating. It seemed to emanate from the giant fortress that dominated the skyline. Defeated and weaker than ever, he stumbled away from the main streets, into the sparse woods that bordered the town. His vision was starting to tunnel, black spots dancing at the edges. His stomach felt like it was trying to digest itself. He was going to collapse. He was going to die here, alone and powerless. It was then that he saw it. Tucked away in a small, sun-dappled clearing was a single, peculiar tree. It was gnarled and ancient-looking, its bark a pale, silvery white. But it was the fruit that held his attention. Dangling from one of the low-hanging branches was a single, solitary piece of fruit, unlike anything he had ever seen. It was shaped vaguely like a large, round melon, but its skin was a mesmerizing swirl of colors. Deep, cosmic black and a vibrant, life-giving emerald green spiraled around each other, creating intricate, nebula-like patterns. The fruit seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, a soft, ethereal glow that beckoned to him. His hero training, his common sense, everything screamed at him not to touch it. It was unnatural, alien. It could be poisonous, a hallucination brought on by sunstroke and dehydration, but his body screamed louder. The hunger was a roaring beast in his gut, overriding all logic. He was desperate. And in his desperation, the strange, glowing fruit didn't look like a threat. It looked like salvation. He reached out a trembling hand and plucked it from the branch. It was surprisingly heavy, its skin smooth and cool to the touch. He lifted it to his nose. It had no scent. Without a moment's more hesitation, he bit into it. The taste was instantaneous and vile. It was like biting into a bundle of live wires while gargling battery acid and rotten gym socks. The flavor was an assault, a chemical bitterness mixed with an acrid sourness that made his eyes water and his entire body recoil. It was, without a doubt, the most disgusting thing he had ever tasted. He gagged, nearly spitting it out, but his starving body refused to let him. He forced himself to swallow the first mouthful, and then another, his stomach churning in protest. He devoured the entire thing in a few desperate, agonizing bites, throwing the core away in revulsion. He dropped to his knees, clutching his stomach, waiting for the inevitable, violent rejection. A strange energy coursed through him, a warm, tingling sensation that started in his gut and spread rapidly through his veins. It wasn't the explosive power of One for All. This was something different. It was quieter, more intricate, like a million tiny switches being flipped on inside his mind. He felt a wave of dizziness, and for a moment the world swam before his eyes. Then, as quickly as it came, the sensation faded. The nausea passed. And he was left with one simple, surprising feeling: he was full. The gnawing hunger was gone, replaced by a sense of satiation. He still felt weak, exhausted, and utterly lost, but the immediate threat of starvation had passed. Whatever that fruit was, it had, at the very least, saved him from that. He rested for a few minutes, letting his body recover, before pushing himself to his feet. He needed answers. He needed to understand this place. Steeling himself, he headed back toward the town, the memory of the fruit's horrific taste still lingering on his tongue. The town square was strangely subdued. People scurried about their business with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. The air of fear was even thicker here, centered around a large wooden cross erected in the middle of the square. Izuku's eyes widened slightly as he saw a man tied to it, a figure with distinctive green hair, a black bandana, and 3 swords strapped to his waist. He was clearly a prisoner, but he held himself with an air of defiant pride, glaring at anyone who dared look his way. Before Izuku could process this, a commotion erupted from a nearby street. A foppish young man with a ridiculous chin and a blonde, bowl-shaped haircut swaggered into the square, flanked by 2 men in white and blue uniforms. They were armed with rifles, their faces set in grim, impassive masks. Izuku recognized them as the enforcers from the fortress. Marines, someone had called them. "Out of my way, you peasants!" The blonde man brayed, his voice nasally and arrogant. He kicked over a fruit vendor's cart, sending apples and oranges rolling across the cobblestones. The poor woman who owned it could only whimper, too terrified to protest. "My father, the great Captain Morgan, rules this town," the man declared to no one in particular. "Which means I, the magnificent Helmeppo, can do whatever I please." To prove his point, he stomped on one of the fallen apples, grinding it into a pulp under his heel. He laughed, a high-pitched, grating sound. Izuku's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He knew this type. The bully who wields borrowed power like a weapon, delighting in the fear of those weaker than himself. Just then, a small girl, no older than 7, darted out from behind a building. She clutched a hastily wrapped bundle of rice balls to her chest. She wasn't looking at Helmeppo, but at the man tied to the cross. Helmeppo's eyes lit up with cruel glee. Well, what have we here? A little criminal, aiding a prisoner?" He strode over and snatched the rice balls from her grasp before she could react. The little girl let out a cry of protest. "Hey! Give those back! Give them back!" Helmeppo sneered. He opened one of the rice balls, looked at it with disdain, and threw it to the ground, stomping on it as he had the apple. "Filthy peasant food! This is what I think of your charity." He threw the other one down as well, grinding it into the dirt. The little girl's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "I worked hard to make those," she sniffled. Helmeppo laughed. "Then you should have worked harder. Now get out of here before I have the Marines throw you in a cell with him." He raised a hand as if to strike her, and Izuku moved. He didn't think. He didn't analyze the threat or lament his lack of a quirk. He saw a crying child and a bully, and his body responded with the same ingrained instinct that had sent him hurtling toward the sludge villain all those years ago. "Stop it!" The words were quiet, but they cut through the tense silence of the square. Helmeppo froze, his hands still in the air. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of Izuku, the strange boy in the tattered green costume, his face smudged with dirt, his eyes burning with an intensity that seemed utterly out of place on his lean frame. "And who are you supposed to be?" Helmeppo asked, a sneer twisting his lips. "Leave her alone," Izuku said, his voice gaining strength. He stepped forward, placing himself between Helmeppo and the little girl. He was shaking, he realized. A fine tremor ran through his entire body. He was terrified. He had no power, no strength. These men had rifles. But he didn't back down. Helmeppo's sneer turned into a glower of outrage. "You dare give me orders? Me? Do you have any idea who my father is?" "I don't care who your father is," Izuku stated, his gaze unwavering. "You're making a little girl cry. That's all I need to know." The sheer, simple heroism of the statement stunned the square into silence. Even the prisoner on the cross cracked open an eye, a flicker of interest on his stern face. Helmeppo's face turned a blotchy, furious red. You! Marines! Teach this piece of trash some respect. Beat him until he can't stand." The two Marines, who had been watching with bored indifference, snapped to attention. They hefted their rifles, not to shoot, but to use them as clubs. They advanced on Izuku, their faces grim. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest. His mind was screaming at him. "Run! You can't win! You're corkless!" But his feet remained planted. He had to protect the girl. The first Marine swung his rifle but in a wide, lazy arc aimed at Izuku's head. It was a sloppy, telegraphed move, and then the world changed. For an infinitesimal sliver of a second, time seemed to stretch, and Izuku's perception shifted into a state of hyper-awareness. The colors of the town square bleached away into monochrome shades of gray, all except for one thing, a single, brilliant, emerald green line of light. It arced through the air, tracing the exact path of the Marine's rifle from its starting point to its intended destination, the side of Izuku's skull. He saw more than just the path. He saw the subtle shift of the Marine's weight onto his back foot, the slight over-rotation of his shoulder, the precise angle of his wrist. He saw the attack not as a singular event, but as a flow chart of physical mechanics, laid bare for his inspection. He didn't have to think. He simply understood. His body, acting on this newfound understanding, ducked. It wasn't a panicked flinch, but a smooth, economical movement. The rifle but whistled through the air where his head had been a moment before, the force of the missed swing carrying the Marine off balance. The second Marine, seeing his partner miss, charged forward, thrusting his rifle like a spear, aiming for Izuku's chest. Again, the world shifted. A new emerald line shot forward, a perfectly straight trajectory of intent. Izuku saw the tension in the Marine's forearm, the way he held his breath just before the thrust. He took a single step to his left. The rifle barrel slid harmlessly past his ribs, so close he could feel the breeze it created. The Marines were stunned. Helmeppo's jaw hung open. "Stand still, you little worm!" The first Marine roared, recovering his balance and swinging again. This time, Izuku didn't just dodge. As the green line of the attack became visible to him, he saw something else, the intersecting path of the second Marine, who was trying to circle around behind him. He saw their clumsiness, their lack of coordination. It was all there, a tactical map painted in lines of light only he could see. He ducked under the first swing again, but this time, he didn't back away. He moved into the attack, stepping past the first Marine just as the second one came charging in. The result was almost comical. The second Marine, unable to stop his forward momentum, crashed headlong into his partner. There was a sickening crunch of bone and a shared grunt of pain as their heads collided. They collapsed into a tangled heap on the cobblestones, groaning. Izuku stood over them, breathing heavily, his mind reeling. What was that? It wasn't a quirk. It wasn't one for all. It was clarity. A perfect, instantaneous analysis of movement and intent. It was as if his analytical mind, his greatest natural asset, had been supercharged, given a new, supernatural sensory input, the fruit. It had to be the fruit. What did you do? Helmeppo stammered, taking a step back, his bravado evaporating into raw fear. He looked from the groaning Marines to the strange, green-haired boy who hadn't even thrown a punch. Izuku didn't have an answer for him. He was just as bewildered as anyone. He looked at his hands, then back at Helmeppo. The fear was still there, a cold pit in his stomach, but it was joined by a new, unfamiliar sensation. A flicker of something he hadn't felt since he woke up on that beach. Hope. He didn't have the power to shatter mountains anymore. He couldn't leap buildings in a single bound. He couldn't create hurricanes with the flick of a finger, but he had just defeated 2 armed men without landing a single blow. He had done it with his mind, with this strange new perception. Helmeppo, recovering a shred of his arrogance, fumbled at his hip and pulled out a pistol. He aimed it at Izuku, his hand shaking violently. Stay back! I'll shoot! I swear I will! Izuku's eyes locked onto the gun. The world shifted again. He didn't just see a line of intent from the barrel. He saw the infinitesimal tremor in Helmeppo's hand. He saw the way his finger was positioned hesitantly on the trigger. He saw the sweat beading on his brow. He saw the fear that was completely overriding his aggression. He won't shoot, Izuku realized with absolute certainty. He's too scared. Go home, Izuku said, his voice calm and steady. He took a step forward. Helmeppo flinched, squeaking in terror. I'm warning you! Izuku took another step. He grabbed the little girl's hand, pulling her behind him. It's over. Leave. That was the final straw. With a terrified yelp, Helmeppo turned and fled, tripping over his own feet as he scrambled away from the town square, screaming for his father. The square was silent for a long moment. The townspeople stared at Izuku, their expressions a mixture of awe, disbelief, and renewed fear of what the Marines' reprisal would be. Izuku's adrenaline began to fade, and the trembling returned full force. He sank to one knee, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had saved someone. The little girl tugged on the tattered remains of his sleeve. He looked down at her. She was looking up at him, her tear-filled eyes now wide with undisguised hero worship. Thank you, mister, she whispered. Izuku managed a weak, watery smile. You're welcome. What's your name? Rika, she said. He looked around at the watching crowd, at the imposing marine base, at the vast, unknown sea visible at the end of the street. He was lost, powerless in the way he once understood power, and in more danger than he had ever been in his life. The loss of one for all was a gaping wound in his soul, an ache that he knew would never fully heal. But as he looked down at the small hand clutching his, at the grateful face of the child he had just protected, he felt a spark ignite in the cold, empty void within him. It wasn't the roaring fire of one for all. It was something smaller, quieter, but no less determined. It was the spark of his own spirit, the unbreakable core of him that had always wanted to be a hero. He couldn't be the next symbol of peace. He couldn't be the next All Might. The power for that was gone, lost to the emerald storm that had brought him here. But maybe, just maybe, he could be something else. He looked at his shaking hands. They were no longer the hands of a god of power. They were the hands of a quick-thinking, analytical boy who could see the patterns in a fight. They were weak, but they had just been strong enough. He could still save people. And in this strange, cruel new world, it looked like a lot of people needed saving. He stood up, pulling Rika gently with him. He had to get out of this town before Captain Morgan arrived. He had to find a way to survive. He had to figure out what this new ability truly was. He had a million questions and no answers. But for the first time since opening his eyes on that sun-scorched beach, Izuku Midoriya had a purpose. The path forward was dark and unknown, but he would walk it. He had to. After all, that's what a hero does. The escape from Shell's town was a blur of hurried whispers and the silent, shared understanding of a populace pushed too far. Izuku, with the little girl Rika holding tightly to his hand, was not hunted, but hidden. The townspeople, who had moments before been paralyzed by fear, now moved with a quiet, rebellious purpose. They shuffled him through back alleys smelling of fish and brine, past shuttered windows from which fearful but grateful eyes watched his progress. They saw him not as a pirate or a criminal, but as the first crack in the wall of their oppression. He was led to the docks, to the far end where the humblest fishing skiffs were moored. An old fisherman with a face like a worn leather sea chart, and hands gnarled by a lifetime of pulling nets met him there. "You caused quite a stir, son," the old man said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. He wasn't scolding. There was a flicker of admiration in his weary eyes. "Morgan will tear this town apart looking for you. I'm sorry," Izuku said, his gaze falling to the ground. "I didn't mean to bring more trouble." "Trouble?" The man let out a short, barking laugh. "Trouble was already here, living in that ugly fortress. You just reminded it that we're still alive." He nodded toward a small, single-mast boat bobbing in the water. It was weathered but sturdy. "Take this. It's not much, but she's seaworthy. There are provisions in the hold, water, dried fish, enough to get you to the next island." Rika's mother rushed forward then, scooping her daughter into a fierce hug before bowing deeply to Izuku. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for your courage." Izuku felt a familiar heat behind his eyes. He wasn't used to this. In his world, heroes were thanked, but the act was part of a structured system. Here, his simple, instinctual action felt like it had moved the world on its axis. "Just stay safe," he managed to say. The old fisherman pressed a strange-looking bracelet into Izuku's hand. It was a simple leather band with a glass sphere mounted on it, a single, quivering needle suspended within. "You're not from the East Blue, are you, boy?" Izuku shook his head. "No, sir. I'm very lost. This is a log pose," the man explained, tapping the glass. "The magnetic fields in the Grand Line will tear a normal compass apart. This needle locks onto the magnetic signature of the next island in the chain. Follow it. It will lead you to Port Meridian. But be warned, the sea is a monster. To sail it, especially the Grand Line, without a proper navigator, it's a suicide wish." With final, hurried goodbyes, Izuku climbed into the skiff. He untied the mooring ropes, his hands clumsy with the unfamiliar knots. As he pushed off from the dock, he looked back at the small group of people watching him, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. He had no power, no crew, and a vessel that was little more than a dinghy against the vastness of the ocean, but he had a destination. He sailed through the night, the log pose's needle his only guide, the stars above a cold, unfamiliar tapestry. The loss of one for all was a constant, hollow ache in his chest, a phantom limb he kept reaching for. Yet, the memory of his confrontation with Helmeppo's men sparked something within him. The emerald lines of intent, the preternatural understanding of movement. It was a new kind of power, one born of analysis and perception. It wasn't the overwhelming force of a hero, but perhaps the subtle blade of a strategist. He didn't know what to call it, but he knew that strange, disgusting fruit was responsible. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that it was all he had left. 2 days later, the outline of Port Meridian rose from the horizon. The old fisherman hadn't been exaggerating. The island was a major hub, its harbor bustling with ships far larger and more impressive than any Izuku had seen in Shell's town. As he navigated his small skiff closer, the atmosphere of the place began to assert itself. It was clean, orderly, and deeply unsettling. Every dock, every warehouse, every crane was emblazoned with the same logo, a stylized golden sea encircling a globe, with the words Croft Marine Logistics stamped beneath it. Men in crisp, gray uniforms with the same logo on their armbands patrolled the docks, their faces impassive and their hands resting on the hilts of the cutlasses at their belts. They weren't Marines, but they carried the same air of authority. Izuku paid the exorbitant small vessel docking fee. With a few of the coins the fisherman had given him, the uniformed guard barely giving him a second glance. The moment he stepped onto the main thoroughfare, the feeling of oppression intensified. This wasn't the naked fear of a tyrant like Axehand Morgan. This was something more insidious. It was the crushing weight of bureaucracy and corporate greed. He saw merchants arguing with Croft's officials over newly implemented tariffs, their protests dismissed with the wave of a hand and a reference to some obscure subsection of a contract. He saw a family being evicted from their waterfront home, their property legally seized by Croft's company for port expansion. This place wasn't ruled by a sword. It was ruled by a ledger. He spent the better part of the day gathering information, his hero instincts morphing into a quiet, observational reconnaissance. He listened in taverns and marketplaces, catching snippets of conversations. Everyone spoke of two things: the iron-fisted monopoly of Silas Croft, the magnate who owned the island in all but name, and the reclusive genius known only as the lighthouse keeper. The stories about the navigator were legendary and contradictory. Some said she could read the currents like a book and predict storms days in advance. Others said she was a bitter hermit who hadn't left her lighthouse in years, a dragon hoarding the greatest treasure on the island, her family's charts. These weren't just sea charts. They were said to be a complete, multi-generational record of the East Blue's currents, weather patterns, and hidden passages, knowledge of priceless value, knowledge that Silas Croft wanted desperately. With a clear goal in mind, Izuku bought a loaf of bread and a water skin and set off, following the winding coastal path that led away from the sterile port and toward a lonely promontory on the far side of the island. The lighthouse stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun, a solitary stone sentinel against the endless blue of the sea. It was ancient, its stone walls scarred by centuries of wind and salt, covered in creeping ivy. It looked strong, defiant, and profoundly lonely. It was a world away from the gilded, polished infrastructure of Croft's port. As he approached the heavy oak door, he hesitated. What was he going to say? "Hello, I'm from another dimension. I have no money and no ship to speak of, but I want to be a hero and I need you to be my navigator?" It sounded insane even in his own head. He took a deep breath, marshaled his courage, and knocked. The sound echoed, seeming to be swallowed by the stone. For a long moment, there was only silence, broken by the cry of gulls and the crash of waves against the rocks below. He was about to knock again when a small, sliding peephole in the door shot open, and a pair of sharp, intelligent, and deeply suspicious gray eyes fixed on him. "What do you want?" The voice was female, crisp and laced with undisguised hostility. Izuku stammered, caught off guard. Hello? My name is Izuku Midoriya. I was told. I was hoping to speak with the navigator who lives here, you and everyone else. The voice shot back. I'm not interested in selling my charts, I'm not interested in working for some pompous merchant captain, and I'm definitely not interested in whatever you're selling. Go away. The peephole started to slide shut. Wait, Izuku said, a note of desperation in his voice. I don't want to buy anything. I just need help. I'm trying to get to the Grand Line, and I was told I need a navigator, a really good one, or I'll die. The peephole stopped. The gray eyes scrutinized him, taking in his tattered green costume, his earnest, worried face, and the complete lack of any piratical swagger. You don't look like a pirate. I'm not, Izuku said quickly. Then he paused. The world considered him one now, didn't it? Well, not a normal one anyway. A short, humorless laugh came from the other side of the door. There's no such thing. A pirate is a pirate. A parasite who takes what they want from others. Now, for the last time, get lost. The peephole slammed shut. Izuku stood there, deflated. He sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. He couldn't give up. The old fisherman's warning echoed in his mind. He sat down on the stone steps, leaning his back against the cold, unyielding door. He would wait. An hour passed. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. He must have looked pathetic, a lonely figure in a ridiculous outfit sitting at the door of a reclusive stranger. Suddenly, the peephole slid open again. Are you still here? The voice asked, this time with a note of incredulous annoyance. Yes, Izuku replied simply. I'm not leaving. Why not? Because I really do need a navigator, he said, his voice quiet but firm. And everyone says you're the best. There was a long silence. Then, the sound of multiple bolts being drawn back, and the heavy door creaked open. The woman standing there was perhaps a few years older than him, with wild, shoulder-length hair the color of storm clouds and the same piercing gray eyes he'd seen through the peephole. She was dressed in practical, ink-stained trousers and a simple tunic. She held a heavy, antique-looking crossbow, and it was aimed squarely at Izuku's chest. You've got 5 minutes to convince me not to put a bolt through you for disturbing my peace, she said, her expression a mask of hardened cynicism. Start talking. Izuku, under the watchful aim of the crossbow, was led up a winding stone staircase. The interior of the lighthouse was a chaotic temple dedicated to cartography. Every available surface was covered in maps. Rolled scrolls were stuffed into barrels, detailed charts were pinned to the walls, and a massive, circular table in the center of the main chamber was dominated by a work in progress, an intricate map of a local strait, its currents and reefs drawn with a surgeon's precision. The air smelled of old paper, salt, and drawing ink. The woman, who introduced herself as Elara, finally lowered her crossbow but kept it within easy reach. She listened to Izuku's story, the heavily edited version, with a permanently skeptical arch to her eyebrow. He told her about his dream, not of being a pirate king, but of sailing the seas to help people who were being crushed by bullies like Axehand Morgan. Elara laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was sharp and brittle, like breaking glass. A heroic pirate? She scoffed, leaning against her map table. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You can't put a coat of paint on a monster and call it a pet. A pirate takes. A hero gives. They are mutually exclusive concepts. But what if the system is the monster? Izuku countered, his voice filled with a passion that surprised even himself. In Shell's town, the Marines were the villains. Here, it's a businessman who uses the law like a weapon. What are people supposed to do when the ones meant to protect them are the ones hurting them? Elara's cynical expression faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of some deep, personal pain in her eyes. She straightened up and walked over to a massive chart pinned to the wall, this one depicting the entire East Blue. It was covered in annotations, lines, and symbols. You want to see the system? She said, her voice turning cold. She tapped a series of points on the map. This island, and this one, all legally acquired by world nobles for vacation properties, their inhabitants forcibly relocated. This shipping lane? It's controlled by a government-sanctioned warlord who demands a protection tax that's just piracy by another name. And see this? She pointed to Port Meridian, her own home. My family has charted these waters for 200 years. We own this lighthouse, this land. Then Silas Croft arrived with a team of lawyers from the world government. He found a loophole in a century-old deed, claimed the land as his, and now he graciously allows me to live here, as long as I don't cause trouble. He stole my family's legacy with a pen and a stamp. She turned to face him, her gray eyes like chips of flint. You fight one bully, and you think you've made a difference. I'm telling you the whole world is the bully. It's a rigged game, and the house always wins. Your brand of heroism is a child's fantasy. Izuku looked at the map, at the stark, clinical lines that represented so much suffering. He saw the patterns, the web of corruption Elara was pointing out. She was right. It was overwhelming, a foe far bigger than any single villain. For a moment, his resolve wavered. What could he possibly do against all of that? He remembered All Might's words, echoing from a world away. You can be a hero. He remembered his own answer to Elara's cynicism. Maybe I can't fix the whole ocean, he said softly, meeting her gaze. But I can help the person drowning right in front of me. And then the next one. And the next. I don't have a grand plan to fix the world. I just know that I can't stand by and watch people get hurt. Elara stared at him, her expression unreadable. His answer was so simple, so naive, so utterly devoid of the bitterness that had consumed her for years. It was infuriating, and also, a tiny, buried part of her had to admit, strangely compelling. Before she could formulate a scathing reply, a loud, thunderous banging echoed from the heavy oak door downstairs. Elara! Open this door! By order of Mr. Silas Croft! A gruff voice bellowed. Elara's face went pale, her cynical composure shattering into pure, cold dread. Tusk! She whispered, her eyes wide. She grabbed her crossbow. He's finally come for the charts. She looked at Izuku, her expression grim. Your 5 minutes are up. You need to leave. Now. There's a back way, down to the cove. Izuku looked at the door, then back at the fear on Elara's face. He saw her, a brilliant, proud woman, cornered in her own home, about to have the last remnants of her family's legacy stolen from her. She was a person in front of him, drowning. He shook his head. I'm not leaving. Alara stared at him in disbelief. Are you insane? That's Tusk Croft's head of security. He's a brute, and he's got at least a dozen men with him. They'll kill you. You're a navigator, right? Izuku asked, his mind already racing, shifting into the analytical mode he knew so well. You know this lighthouse better than anyone. Every loose floorboard, every weak railing, every draft. What does that have to do with anything? She demanded, as the banging on the door grew more violent, accompanied by the splintering sound of wood. Izuku's eyes seemed to glow with a strange, intense light. It has everything to do with it. A faint, emerald aura, visible only to his own perception, began to flicker around him. They think they're storming a lighthouse. We're going to make them fight one. The door crashed open. A large, heavy-set man with a scarred face and a cruel sneer stepped inside, flanked by a dozen of Croft's uniformed guards. This was Tusk. He cracked his knuckles, a sound like rocks grinding together. All right, Alara. Mr. Croft has been patient long enough. Hand over the ancestral charts, and we'll let you keep living in this dusty old relic. Resist. He grinned, showing a row of yellow teeth. And we'll throw you from the top of it. He scanned the room and his eyes landed on Izuku. And who's this? Your little boyfriend? We'll throw him off first. His men laughed and started to advance up the stairs. Alara, Izuku said, his voice low and urgent. To your left, there's a coil of old rope on that hook. Is it heavy? About 30 pounds, why? She whispered back, her knuckles white on her crossbow. When I yell, cut the rope holding it. Before she could ask another question, Izuku did something completely unexpected. He grabbed a heavy, leather-bound atlas from a shelf and hurled it down the stairs. It wasn't aimed at anyone in particular, but it hit the stone steps with a loud thud, causing the first few men to flinch and break formation. It was the distraction he needed. As the men's attention was momentarily diverted, Izuku's cozy eye know me ability flared to life. The world desaturated, and he saw it. A web of emerald green lines, crisscrossing the stairwell, each one representing a guard's intended path. He saw their clumsy footwork, their over-reliance on numbers, the way they bunched together in the narrow space. It was a tactical nightmare for them, and a perfect opportunity for him. Now! Izuku yelled. Alara, acting on pure instinct, drew a small knife and sliced the rope. The heavy coil tumbled off its hook and swung down like a pendulum, crashing directly into the center of the clustered guards. It sent 3 of them toppling backward like bowling pins, creating a chaotic pile-up at the bottom of the stairs. Tusk roared in frustration. Idiots! Spread out! Get up there! The remaining men, more cautious now, began to ascend again. One of them, a lanky man favoring his right side, lunged forward. Izuku saw the green line of his attack, a simple sword thrust, and easily sidestepped. At the same time, he pointed to a spot on the wall. Alara, the loose stone! Alara, her mind now catching on to his strategy, slammed her palm against a section of the wall. A chunk of mortar, loosened by years of sea spray, gave way. A single stone brick popped out and clattered down the steps, perfectly timed to trip the lanky guard, who tumbled gracelessly into 2 of his comrades. It was a symphony of controlled chaos. Izuku was the conductor, and Alara, with her intimate knowledge of the lighthouse, was his orchestra. He never threw a punch. He didn't need to. He moved with an uncanny grace, a dancer in a field of swinging blades. He saw every attack before it was launched, every clumsy step, every overcommitted lunge. The floorboard to your right is rotten, he'd call out, and Alara would stomp on it, sending a guard's foot crashing through. The tapestry! Pull it! He'd command, and she would yank a heavy, dusty wall hanging down, enveloping 2 more men in a cloud of blinding fabric. He was turning the lighthouse into a finely tuned trap, using its own history and decay as his weapons. Alara, her initial fear replaced by a fierce, exhilarating adrenaline, moved with a fluid precision, her mind working in perfect sync with his. She was a cartographer, a master of space and angles, and she instinctively understood the tactical geometry he was creating. Finally, only Tusk remained. He stormed up the stairs, shoving his own men out of the way, his face purple with rage. He was a different beast from his grunts, faster, stronger, his movements more deliberate. The emerald line that projected from him was sharper, less wavering. He lunged, not with a simple thrust, but a powerful, cleaving swing of his cutlass aimed to cut Izuku in half. Izuku dodged, the blade whistling past his ear, but he felt the sheer force of the blow. He couldn't win a direct confrontation. He backed up, leading Tusk to the very top of the lighthouse, the lantern room. It was a circular chamber with glass windows offering a panoramic view of the sea. In the center was the massive lens and lantern assembly. "No more tricks, boy," Tusk snarled, advancing on him. "Just you and me." Izuku's eyes darted around the room. He saw the heavy chains for raising and lowering the lantern. He saw the polished brass, slick with oil. He saw the way the setting sun glinted off the lens, creating a blinding flare at a certain angle. He saw the solution. He waited until Tusk was in the perfect position, then kicked over a can of lantern oil. The slick fluid spread across the floor. Tusk's eyes widened, and he adjusted his footing, momentarily off balance. In that split second, Izuku moved, grabbing one of the polished brass handles of the lens assembly, and using it to swing his body around the central column. He landed on the other side, just as Tusk, overcompensating for the oily floor, charged past. Izuku then shoved the entire, massive lens housing. It was incredibly heavy, but it was on a rotating pivot. It moved just enough for the setting sun to hit the main prism at a perfect angle, focusing the light into a single, intensely bright beam, directed straight into Tusk's eyes. The brute cried out, blinded, staggering backward. His feet hit the oil slick. With a comical yelp, his legs shot out from under him, and he crashed onto his back, his head hitting the stone floor with a sickening thud that knocked him unconscious. Silence descended, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breathing. Izuku stood, his body trembling with post-fight adrenaline, over the unconscious form of Tusk and the groaning pile of guards at the bottom of the stairs. Elara emerged from the stairwell, her crossbow held loosely at her side, her face a canvas of utter disbelief and awe. He hadn't beaten them with strength. He had beaten them with his mind, with strategy, and with her help. He had looked at a hopeless situation and had, quite literally, seen the path to victory. "Who? What are you?" she breathed. Izuku offered her a shaky, exhausted smile. "I'm Izuku Midoriya. And I still need a navigator." They didn't have much time. Tusk and his men would wake up eventually. While Elara bound them with rope, Izuku explained the source of his ability, the strange, disgusting fruit he'd eaten. "A devil fruit," Elara murmured, her eyes wide with recognition. "I've read about them. They grant a person a single, incredible power, but in exchange, the sea rejects them. They can never swim again." The news hit Izuku with a strange weight. He, who had come from a world of landlocked cities, was now in a world of endless ocean, and he had been cursed to be unable to swim. The irony was not lost on him. "But what do we do now?" Elara asked, her pragmatism returning. "Croft won't stop. He'll send the Marines next. His pet, Captain Varric, will do anything for a bribe." "Then we don't run," Izuku said, a determined glint in his eye. He looked at the pile of ancestral charts on her table. "You said he stole your family's legacy with a pen. We're going to use that same pen to take it all back." An hour later, a very different scene unfolded in the port of Meridian. Izuku, now changed into some spare, ill-fitting clothes Elara had given him, walked calmly into the local Marine branch office. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to report a crime. He asked to speak to the highest-ranking officer available, who wasn't Captain Varric. After some resistance, a young, stern-faced lieutenant named Kale agreed to see him. Izuku, with Elara standing silently behind him, presented his case. He laid out one of Elara's charts on Kale's desk. "This isn't just a map, Lieutenant," Izuku explained. "This is a ledger. See these markings?" He pointed to Elara's meticulous annotations. "This is a record of every illegal tariff, every extorted fee, every act of corporate piracy Silas Croft has committed for the last 5 years, all cross-referenced with official shipping manifests he thought were private." Kale's eyes widened as he scanned the chart. He was a good Marine, one who had long been disgusted by his superiors' blatant corruption, but he never had the proof or the power to act. Now here it was, handed to him by a strange boy in a borrowed shirt. Just then, The doors burst open and Silas Croft himself stormed in, flanked by the corrupt Captain Varick. Croft had heard of Tusk's failure and had come to leverage his authority. "Lieutenant Cale! Arrest this vagrant and this thieving woman at once!" Croft bellowed. "They assaulted my men and are in possession of my property." "Your property, Mr. Croft?" Cale asked, his voice dangerously calm as he held up the chart. "Or the evidence of your racketeering, smuggling, and conspiracy to defraud the world government?" Croft's face went white. Varick began to bluster, ordering his men to arrest everyone, but it was too late. Cale's own loyal subordinates, Marines who had chafed under Varick's command for years, emerged, their rifles leveled. The standoff was tense, but the truth, laid bare on Ilara's chart, was undeniable. Croft and Varick were arrested, their reign of legal terror finally over. Later that evening, on the now liberated docks, Lieutenant Cale stood with Izuku and Ilara. "You took an incredible risk," Cale said, a note of respect in his voice. "The world government will send investigators. Things will be better here. I owe you a debt." He gestured to a small, sleek ship moored at a nearby dock. It was a caravel, built for speed and durability, its sails a clean, unmarked white. "This was confiscated from a smuggler last month. She's seaworthy, and officially she's scheduled to be scuttled. But paperwork can get lost." Izuku stared at the ship, his heart swelling. It wasn't a skiff. It was a real ship. His ship. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Don't say anything," Cale said with a slight smile. "Just get out of my jurisdiction before I have to arrest you. Your face is on a new bounty poster, you know. They're calling you Green Hero Deku. It's causing quite a stir at HQ." He tipped his hat and walked away. Izuku and Ilara stood on the deck of their new ship, the sea breeze fresh and clean. The future that had been stolen from her, locked away in a dusty lighthouse, was now as open and vast as the ocean before them. "So," Ilara said, breaking the silence. She was leaning against the railing, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time. It transformed her face, melting away the cynical hardness. "A ship needs a name, Captain." Izuku looked around at the sturdy deck, at the mast that reached for the stars, at his first crewmate. This ship wasn't a tool for plunder or fame. It was a vessel of hope. It was the means by which he could get to the next person who was drowning. It was a chance. "Let's call her the Saving Grace," he said. Ilara's smile widened. "I like it. It's ridiculous and overly dramatic. Suits you perfectly." She moved to the ship's wheel, her hands resting on it with a natural, familial ease. "So where to, Captain Deku?" "The log pose is set for a place called Shimatsuki Village. It's known for its swordsmen." Izuku joined her at the helm, looking out at the dark water where the moon cast a silver path. He had a ship. He had a navigator. He had a purpose, clearer and sharper than ever before. The ache of his lost power was still there, but it was no longer a void. It was a space waiting to be filled with new strength, new friends, and a new kind of heroism. "To Shimatsuki Village, then," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound confidence. "Let's go find a swordsman." The first week aboard the Saving Grace was a period of profound adjustment. For Izuku, it was a constant, humbling education in the raw physicality of a world without superpowers. Every morning, he would wake before dawn, his body aching in ways it never had before, and begin a grueling physical regimen on the deck. Push-ups until his arms screamed, sit-ups until his core burned, and laps around the small caravel until his lungs felt ready to burst. He was desperately trying to bridge the cavernous gap between what his mind could perceive and what his body could execute. The emerald lines of his devil fruit ability showed him the perfect way to move, but his muscles, ligaments, and stamina were all tragically, mortally human. Ilara would watch him from the quarterdeck, a cup of steaming tea in her hands, her expression a carefully constructed mask of neutrality that couldn't quite hide her growing curiosity. Her initial, biting cynicism had softened, weathered away by the undeniable evidence of Izuku's character. He was earnest to a fault, impossibly optimistic, and possessed a work ethic that bordered on self-punishment. He was, in every way, the antithesis of the pirates she had read about and despised. You're going to wear yourself out before we even see the next island, you know," she commented one morning, as Izuku collapsed onto the deck in a heap, his chest heaving. "Have to get stronger," he gasped, wiping sweat from his brow. "My ability is useless if my body can't keep up. It's like knowing the answer to a test question but my hand is too slow to write it down. It's a strange power," she admitted, walking over and offering him a water skin. He took it with a grateful nod. "The cozy I know me. The individuality fruit. I've been reading what I can from some old books I have. Most devil fruits are flashy, turning into fire, creating earthquakes. Yours is subtle. Almost invisible. It feels like an extension of what I used to do," Izuku confessed, his voice tinged with the familiar ache of loss. "I always analyze things. Quirks, heroes, fighting styles. I have notebooks filled with it. This is just faster. More real. It sees the why behind every movement." He looked at his hands, no longer seeing them as useless, but as tools waiting to be sharpened. Alara's role quickly evolved from navigator to a general mentor on the ways of the world. She taught him how to tie a proper clove hitch, how to read the clouds for signs of a coming squall, and how to navigate by the unfamiliar constellations at night. In return, he listened. He asked her about her charts, about her family's history, and he saw the passion ignite in her eyes as she spoke of the sea not as a barrier, but as a living, breathing entity with its own language. They discussed their next move endlessly over their simple meals of dried fish and hardtack. "We need a fighter," Alara stated plainly one evening, pointing to a spot on her chart. "We're approaching the Shimatsuki village region. It's peaceful, mostly, but this is still the East Blue. We were lucky with Tusk and his thugs. We won't always be able to rely on a clever trap. We need someone who can handle a straightforward fight. Someone who can be our shield and our sword, a combat specialist." Izuku agreed, his mind already creating a profile. "Someone strong, but good. Someone who fights for the right reasons. Good is a luxury out here, Deku," she reminded him, though her tone lacked its former sting. "But the rumors from this area speak of a man who might fit your ridiculously high standards. They call him Kaito the Ronin. Some say he's a demon with a blade, that he cut down a dozen marine officers in the blink of an eye. Others say he's a ghost who protects farmers from bandits. The stories are always violent, but the victims are always bullies." "A Ronin," Izuku mused. "A masterless samurai. Why is he here? I thought most swordsmen of that caliber came from Wano." "The rumors say he does," Alara said, her expression serious. "And if that's true, you need to be careful. Wano is a closed-off country, and its people are fiercely proud. For one of their samurai to be a masterless Ronin in the East Blue, something terrible must have happened. He's either a traitor or an exile. Either way, he's dangerous." Izuku nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the log poles indicated their destination lay. Dangerous or not, a protector of the weak sounded exactly like the kind of person he was looking for. The archipelago of the Shimatsuki region was a far cry from the corporate sterility of Port Meridian, or the fearful tension of Shell's Town. It was a cluster of verdant, green islands, dotted with small farming hamlets and fishing villages. The air was clean and smelled of rich soil and cherry blossoms. As the Saving Grace docked at the main village, a place of clean, wooden dojos and tranquil rock gardens, it felt like they had sailed into a different, more peaceful world. But peace, Izuku was learning, was often a thin veneer. Their inquiries about the Ronin Kaido were met with a curious mixture of fear and tight-lipped silence. The villagers would acknowledge the name with a nervous glance over their shoulder, but no one would offer any concrete information. They spoke of him in hushed tones, like a local superstition, a vengeful spirit who brought trouble wherever he went. Yet, when Izuku and Alara visited the marketplace, they noticed the merchants gave them a little extra fruit for their purchase. An old woman running a tea house refused their payment. It was a strange, unspoken gratitude. They were being thanked for something, but for what, no one would say. "They're protecting him," Alara deduced as they walked down a quiet path leading away from the village. "They're afraid of him, but they're also afraid of what might happen to him, or what might happen to them if he leaves. Their answer came in the form of a plume of dark smoke rising from a ridge a few miles away. It was an ugly, black smear against the tranquil blue sky. Trouble, they ran. The smoke was coming from a small, isolated farmhouse nestled in a valley. As they drew closer, the scene resolved into a nightmare. The farmhouse itself was surrounded by a motley group of about 15 men. They were rough-looking, armed with a variety of crude weapons, rusty swords, axes, a few with primitive crossbows. They jeered and shouted, their voices a cacophony of cruel laughter that echoed unnervingly in the peaceful valley. A small barn next to the house was ablaze, the source of the smoke. These weren't bandits. They carried themselves with a swaggering confidence, and the man who seemed to be their leader, a hulking figure with a cruel, piggish face and hands like slabs of meat, held up a piece of paper. Even from a distance, Izuku could recognize it. A bounty poster. "Come on out, Ronin!" the big man bellowed, his voice thick with malice. "We know you're in there. The farmer and his family told us everything before they got clumsy. This is between us bounty hunters and you. Give yourself up, and we'll let the woman and her brats live." A woman's scream from inside the house was his answer. Izuku and Elara took cover behind a rocky outcropping, their hearts pounding. "Bounty hunters!" Elara hissed, her face pale. "This must be Kaido's handiwork. He must have protected that farmer, and now they're using his family as bait." Izuku's eyes scanned the scene, his mind already dissecting it. 15 men, confident and cruel. A single defender inside, whose position was compromised by the presence of hostages. The burning barn was a psychological tactic, meant to instill terror and force a rash decision. "This is Iron Grip Gallo's crew," Elara whispered, recognizing the face on the bounty poster the leader was waving. It wasn't Kaido's. It was Gallo's own, a low-level but notoriously vicious bounty hunter. "He's a scavenger. He never goes after big targets unless he has an overwhelming advantage." Suddenly, the front door of the farmhouse slid open. A man stepped out, his silhouette framed by the dark interior of the house. He was tall and lean, with long, black hair tied back in a simple topknot. He wore the traditional, somber-colored kimono of a ronin, worn and travel-stained. Tucked into his sash were 2 swords, a long katana and a shorter wakizashi. His face was stoic, an unreadable mask of calm, but his eyes, dark and sharp, burned with a cold, contained fury. On his back, strapped across his shoulders, was a third, much larger sword. It was an odachi, a great sword meant for battlefields, not duels. This was Kaido. "Release the family," Kaido said, his voice as calm and cold as a winter stream. It carried an unnatural weight, cutting through the jeers of the bounty hunters. Gallo laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "That's not how this works, demon. You have a 30 million berry bounty on your head. You come with us, and maybe we don't set the house on fire next." To punctuate his threat, one of his men roughly shoved a woman and 2 small children out the door, holding a knife to the woman's throat. Kaito's stoic expression didn't change, but Izuku saw his hand, resting on the hilt of his katana, tighten until the knuckles were white. "I see," Kaido said softly, and then he moved. It wasn't a charge. It was a disappearance. One moment he was standing on the porch, the next he was a blur of motion, covering the 20 feet between him and the man holding the woman hostage in what seemed like a single, fluid step. There was a sound like the whisper of silk, the almost imperceptible shing of a blade being drawn and sheathed in the same motion. The bounty hunter holding the woman froze, a look of confusion on his face. A thin, red line appeared across his chest. He collapsed without a sound. Kaido was already moving again, a whirlwind of gray and black. He drew his katana, and it became a silver extension of his will. His style was not flashy. It was economical, precise, and lethally efficient. Every movement had a purpose, every cut was a final statement. A bounty hunter swung an axe. Kaido sidestepped inside the arc of the clumsy weapon and the man fell. 2 more charged from the sides. A single, spinning slash disabled them both, their sword arms rendered useless. In less than 10 seconds 4 men were down, and the rest were scrambling back, their bravado evaporating into raw, primal fear. "He's incredible," Izuku breathed, his analytical mind captivated by the swordsman's perfect form. "But he's still just one man. Elara countered, her voice tense. She was right. Gallo, recovering from his shock, roared in fury. Don't just stand there, you fools! He can't fight all of you at once! Archers! Pin him down! The rest of you, surround him! The dynamic of the fight shifted. Two men with crossbows began firing bolts, forcing Kaido onto the defensive. He deflected them with his blade, the sharp ping of steel on steel echoing in the valley, but it broke his offensive flow. The remaining bounty hunters, emboldened by their leader's command, formed a ragged circle around him, their swords and axes held ready. They attacked in waves, their crude, undisciplined strikes forcing Kaido to be everywhere at once. He was a master, but the sheer numbers were beginning to wear on him. For every man he took down, two more would lunge. A net flew through the air, and he was forced to slice it to ribbons, leaving himself open for a half-second. A sword thrust nicked his arm, drawing a line of crimson on his sleeve. He was a lone wolf surrounded by a pack of hyenas, and the pack was slowly, inexorably, closing in. The farmer's wife had managed to get her children back inside the house, but Gallo, seeing Kaido beleaguered, grinned cruelly and grabbed a lit torch from the burning barn. Time's up, Ronin! He bellowed, preparing to hurl it onto the farmhouse roof. Izuku's eyes widened. The hostages. Kaido was being worn down, and his one moment of hesitation to protect the house would be his last. Elara, stay here. Stay hidden, Izuku said, his voice tight with resolve. What are you doing? She hissed, grabbing his arm. You can't fight them. I'm not going to, Izuku said, his eyes glowing with that now familiar intensity as his devil fruit ability flared to life. I'm going to be his spotter. He broke cover. Hey! Izuku's voice, clear and surprisingly loud, cut through the sounds of battle. Leave him alone! Every head, including Kaido's, turned toward the source of the interruption. They saw a green-haired boy in strange clothes, standing on the rocky outcropping, completely unarmed. Gallo stared for a moment, then burst into derisive laughter. Well, look what we have here! A hero? You come to die too, kid? Izuku ignored him. His focus was entirely on the fight. The world had bled into shades of gray, and the combatants were outlined in auras of emerald light. He saw it all, a divine tactical map laid bare before him. He saw the subtle tells of each bounty hunter, the way one favored his left leg after an old injury, the slight tremor in another's sword hand, the over-rotation of a third shoulder when he swung his axe. He saw the archers fumbling with their next bolts, the precise timing of their reloads. And he saw the nexus of it all, Kaido, a whirlwind of brilliant, controlled energy, his lines of movement sharp and precise, but hemmed in by a chaotic web of sloppy, aggressive ones. Ronin-san! Izuku yelled, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. The man on your left. His knee is weak. A low sweep. Kaido, cornered and fighting for his life, had no time to question the source of the impossible advice. He acted on instinct. He ducked under a wild sword swing and, in the same motion, his foot shot out, sweeping the legs of the bounty hunter Izuku had indicated. The man cried out as his bad knee buckled, and he went down in a heap. The other bounty hunters hesitated, confused by the sudden, specific command from the strange boy. Two on your right! Izuku's voice cut through the air again. The big one telegraphs his overhead swing. The other one will thrust as you dodge. Parry the thrust into the big one's path. It was a complex, high-level maneuver that required perfect timing. Kaido's eyes widened slightly. The advice wasn't just accurate, it was tactically brilliant. He moved, flowing like water. Just as Izuku predicted, the large bounty hunter raised his axe for a clumsy overhead chop. Kaido ignored him, focusing on the second man's sword thrust. He didn't just dodge it. He met the blade with his own, not to block, but to redirect. With a flick of his wrist, he angled the man's sword directly into the path of the descending axe. There was a sickening crunch as the axe head slammed into the unsuspecting bounty hunter, who had been lunging forward. The man with the sword stared in horror at his own blade, now embedded in his comrade. A space had opened in the circle. Archer on the roof of the barn is reloading, Izuku shouted. You have 3 seconds. The man in front of you is off balance. Kaido didn't need to be told twice. He surged forward, a gray blur, and dispatched the off-balance opponent with a swift strike to the hilt of his sword, disarming him. The fight had transformed. Kaido was no longer just a lone warrior. He was one half of a perfectly synchronized combat unit. Izuku was his eyes, his mind, seeing every angle, predicting every move, turning the bounty hunter's chaotic assault into a predictable pattern. Kaido, freed from the mental burden of analyzing the entire battlefield, could now focus his prodigious skill on pure, perfect execution. He moved with a deadly grace that was terrifying to behold. His blade was a blur, guided by the unerring instructions of the boy on the hill. Dodge left! He's trying to throw dirt in your eyes, Shing. Another bounty hunter fell. The two behind you are trying to flank. Use a spinning draw to catch them both. A half-dozen men went down in a flurry of motion too fast for the eye to follow. Gallo watched, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, the lit torch still in his hand. His overwhelming advantage had evaporated. His men were being dismantled with surgical precision by a partnership that should not exist. Kill the boy! Gallo roared, realizing where the true threat lay. Shoot the boy on the hill! The remaining crossbowmen, panicking, turned and fired a bolt at Izuku. Izuku saw the emerald line of the projectile streaking toward him. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he wasn't fast enough to dodge it. His body couldn't keep up. He braced for the impact, a flare of pain, but it never came. A flash of silver, so fast it was almost invisible, intercepted the bolt in midair. Kaito had thrown his wakizashi, his shorter blade, with impossible speed and accuracy, embedding it in the wooden shaft of the bolt, and sending it spinning harmlessly into the dirt. Kaito now stood amidst the groaning, defeated forms of the bounty hunters, his katana held in a ready stance, his dark eyes fixed on their leader. Gallo, trembling with rage and fear, finally threw the torch. It sailed through the air in a fiery arc, aimed for the dry, thatched roof of the farmhouse. But Kaito was already moving. He sheathed his katana and in the same fluid motion, unslung the massive odachi from his back. The great sword, nearly as tall as he was, hummed as he swung it. It wasn't a cut. It was a controlled sweep that generated a powerful gust of wind. The gust caught the torch in mid-flight, extinguishing the flame and sending it tumbling uselessly to the ground. Gallo stood alone, his crew defeated, his last-ditch effort thwarted. He dropped his sword and raised his hands in surrender, his body shaking. Silence fell over the valley, broken only by the crackle of the still-burning barn and the whimpers of the defeated bounty hunters. Kaito stood, his chest rising and falling slowly, the great sword resting on his shoulder. He surveyed the scene, then his gaze turned and locked onto Izuku. It was an intense, piercing stare, not of anger, but of profound, unsettling inquiry. After ensuring the family was safe and tying up Gallo and his crew for the local authorities to find, Kaito finally approached Izuku and Alara. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, his stoic expression firmly back in place, betraying none of the furious action of the preceding minutes. He stopped before Izuku, his hand still resting on the hilt of his sheathed katana. "You," he said, his voice a low, even baritone. "How did you know their movements?" Izuku, his adrenaline finally fading, felt a wave of exhaustion. I have an ability. A power from a devil fruit. It lets me see things. The flow of a fight, a person's intent, their weaknesses. I can't fight well myself, but I can analyze." Kaito's dark eyes studied him, searching for any hint of deception. He was a man who lived by a code of honor and skill, and he had just witnessed a form of skill that defied all logic. He had been fighting his whole life, honing his senses, his instincts, his body, to a razor's edge. And this boy, this unarmed, untrained boy, had seen the battlefield with a clarity that he, a master swordsman, could only dream of. "You guided my blade as if it were your own," Kaito stated. It was not a question, but a statement of all. "You were the one fighting," Izuku said, shaking his head. "I just helped you see the whole board." "You did more than that," Kaito said. He turned to Alara, who was watching the exchange with a wary but impressed expression. "And you? You are with him?" "Looks that way," Alara said, her arms crossed. "He has a habit of collecting strays who are in over their heads." Kaito fell silent for a long moment, his gaze turning inward. The farmer and his family came out then, bowing deeply, their faces etched with a gratitude so profound it needed no words. Kaido simply gave them a short, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of a duty fulfilled. He led Izuku and Elara away from the farmhouse, toward a small, secluded grove by a stream. There, he finally sheathed his odachi and sat on a smooth, gray stone. "My name is Kaido," he said, formally introducing himself. "I am from Wano country. I'm Izuku Midoriya. My friends call me Deku. And this is Elara. I was once a samurai in service to the Kazuki clan." Kaido continued, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. "I was taught that the sword is an instrument of justice, meant to protect the weak from the strong. I believed in that code. I lived by it." His eyes grew distant, focused on a past Izuku could only imagine. One day, a samurai from a powerful, allied family, a man of high birth and low character, was tormenting a peasant family in the fields, trying to claim their land. I was on patrol. I intervened. He drew his blade on the unarmed farmer. By our code, I was bound to defend the innocent. I disarmed the nobleman. I did not kill him, but I dishonored him in public. A shadow passed over his face. For this act, I was brought before his lord. My master was forced to apologize. And I was given a choice: commit seppuku for daring to raise a hand against a noble, or accept exile. I was stripped of my rank, my name, my honor. I became a ronin. I chose exile, not because I feared death, but because I knew, in my soul, that what I had done was right. I would not die for a code that protected the corrupt. He looked at Izuku, his gaze sharp and clear once more. I have been wandering these seas ever since, a blade without a master. I have searched for a purpose, for a lord worthy of loyalty, not a lord of wealth or power, but one of character. One who embodies the true spirit of the code I was punished for upholding. He rose from the stone and walked toward Izuku. He stopped a few feet away, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the late afternoon sun. "Today," Kaido said, his voice resonating with a deep, unwavering conviction, "I watched you, an unarmed boy, stand against a dozen armed men, not with strength of body, but with strength of spirit. You risked your life not for treasure or fame, but to protect a family you did not know. Your power is not in your fists, Midoriya Izuku. It is in your heart. It is the quality of a true leader." And then, to Izuku's and Elara's utter astonishment, the proud, stoic ronin from Wano knelt. He placed one knee on the soft grass, bowed his head, and rested the hilt of his katana on the ground before him. "I have found my purpose," Kaido declared, his voice ringing with the solemnity of a sacred oath. "My blade has been aimless for too long. I, Kaido, pledge my sword and my life to you, Captain Deku. Command me. I will be your shield. I will be your sword. I will help you protect the weak." Izuku was speechless. His mind, which could process the chaos of battle in a nanosecond, ground to a halt. This man, this incredible warrior, was kneeling before him, pledging his life to him. To him, a quirkless, powerless boy from another world. The sheer, overwhelming weight of the gesture, the depth of the trust it implied, brought tears to Izuku's eyes. He remembered All Might, bestowing upon him the sacred torch of one for all. This felt similar. It was a transfer of trust, of hope, of legacy. "Kaido-san, please stand up," Izuku stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to." "I'm not, I do," Kaido said, his head still bowed. "I must." Elara watched, her cynical heart aching with an emotion she couldn't name. This ridiculous, green-haired boy didn't conquer, he didn't command. He inspired. And it was a force more powerful than any army. Izuku took a deep, shaky breath, wiping the tears from his eyes. He looked at the kneeling swordsman, a pillar of honor and strength. He looked at Elara, his first friend in this world, her sharp mind and guarded heart now bound to his journey. He looked at their ship, the Saving Grace, waiting in the harbor. A crew. He had a real crew. "Okay," Izuku said, finding his voice, a new kind of captain's authority settling upon him, not born of arrogance, but of responsibility. "Stand up, Kaido. Welcome to the hero pirates." Kaido rose, a flicker of a smile, small and rare, touching his lips. He was no longer a masterless samurai. He was a sword with a purpose. The three of them stood there in the quiet grove as the sun began to set, a strange and unlikely trio. The boy with the hero's soul and a strategist's mind, the woman with a stolen past and the knowledge of the seas, and the swordsman with a dishonored name and an unbreakable code. Their journey had just begun, but for the first time, they looked like a force to be reckoned with. They were a captain, a navigator, and a warrior. They were the beginning of a legend. The calm that had settled over the crew of the Saving Grace after leaving the Shimatsuki region was short-lived. It was replaced by a creeping, insidious tension that coiled in the humid air of the open sea. The source of this tension lay with their newest crewmate, Kaido. The Ronin was as stoic and uncomplaining as ever, but even his formidable discipline could not fully conceal the truth. The nick he had received on his arm during the fight with Gallo's crew was more than a simple cut. By the third day at sea, the wound was an ugly, inflamed slash of crimson against his skin, a spiderweb of dark veins spreading from its edges. A fever had taken hold, leaving him slick with sweat even in the cool of the night, and a tremor ran through his hand that made it difficult to even hold a cup of water, let alone the hilt of his sword. Elara, with her practical, no-nonsense approach, did her best. She cleaned the wound with boiled seawater and what little alcohol they had, applying poultices of herbs she recognized from her books. But her knowledge was that of a cartographer who had read a few chapters on survival medicine, not a trained doctor. The fever only worsened. "It was a poison blade," she said grimly, her voice low as she and Izuku stood at the ship's helm, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Kaido was below deck, ostensibly meditating, but they both knew he was fighting a losing battle against the sickness ravaging his body. A slow-acting neurotoxin, probably, designed to cripple, not kill quickly. "It's beyond my ability to treat." Izuku stared at the log pose, its needle quivering insistently toward their next destination. His own helplessness was a bitter pill to swallow. His cozy no mi was a tool of perception, not creation. He could analyze a swordsman's stance or the structural weakness of a lighthouse, but he couldn't see the invisible poison warring in his friend's blood. He had a fighter, a warrior who had pledged his life to him, and he was failing in his first duty as a captain, to protect his crew. "We need a doctor," Izuku stated, the words heavy with urgency. Now, Elara unfolded one of her charts on the helm, its surface rippling in the sea breeze. Her finger, stained with ink, traced a path across the sea lanes. "The log pose is pointing us toward the Ostrika kingdom, but that's still 4 days away, maybe more." "He doesn't have that long," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There's another option, a closer one. But it's not good." She tapped a small, crudely drawn island that was off the main sea route, marked on her chart with a single, ominous skull and crossbones, not the jolly pirate kind, but the stark, warning kind. "Isla Fiber, Fever Island. It's not on any official marine maps. It's a place sailors whisper about. They say it's cursed, a quarantine zone for a plague that wiped out its population years ago. No one goes there. But if it was a plague island..." Izuku's mind made the connection instantly. "Then there must have been doctors. Hospitals. Medical supplies, maybe." "Exactly," Elara confirmed, though her expression was fraught with doubt. "It's a long shot. The place could be picked clean, or the plague could still be active. But it's the only island within a day's sail." The choice was no choice at all. "Set a course," Izuku commanded, his voice firm. "We're going to Fever Island." As the Saving Grace approached the island the next afternoon, the name Isla Fiber felt chillingly appropriate. A thick, cloying mist, tinged a sickly yellow-green, clung to the coastline, refusing to burn off even under the midday sun. The air grew heavy, humid, and still, carrying on it the fetid scent of decay, stagnant water, and something else, something vaguely chemical and medicinal. The island itself was a tangle of overgrown jungle, unnaturally vibrant and lush, as if it were feeding on a profound sickness within the soil. They found a dilapidated dock, its pylons slick with green algae, and moored the ship. As Izuku and Elara prepared to go ashore, Kaido emerged from below deck, leaning heavily on the doorframe. His face was pale and drawn, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were clear and determined. He had strapped his swords to his waist. "I am coming with you," he stated, his voice a low rasp. "No, you're not," Alara shot back immediately. "You're in no condition to even stand. You'll be a liability. My blade can still protect my captain," Kaido insisted, taking a shaky step forward. Izuku placed a gentle but firm hand on his swordsman's shoulder. "Kaido, your duty right now is to conserve your strength so a doctor can help you. That's an order." He softened his tone. "We're doing this for you. Trust us." The word trust seemed to land with more force than any command. Kaido looked at Izuku's earnest, worried face, then at Alara's stern but concerned expression. After a long moment, he gave a slow, reluctant nod and allowed Izuku to help him back to his bunk. Leaving Kaido on the ship felt wrong, but it was necessary. Armed with a medical kit of empty hopes and a pair of cutlasses they barely knew how to use, Izuku and Alara stepped onto the rotting planks of the dock and into the oppressive silence of Isla Fiber. The path leading from the docks opened into what was once a bustling village square. Now, it was a ghost town. Doors hung open on rusted hinges, windows were boarded up, and a thick layer of green moss and yellowing vines crawled over everything. Crude signs were painted on the walls in faded red paint. "Quarantine, keep out, the plague reigns." The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the unsettling sound of a single, rhythmic cough, echoing from somewhere deep within the shuttered village. They were not alone. As they ventured deeper, a door creaked open. A man with wild, terrified eyes and a face ravaged by sickness peered out at them. He held a rusty pitchfork like a spear. "Go away!" he hissed, his voice cracking. "Leave this cursed place. We have enough ghosts here without you bringing more. We're not here to cause trouble," Izuku said, holding his hands up in a peaceful gesture. "We're looking for medical supplies. A doctor. Our friend is sick." "A doctor?" The man laughed, a harsh, painful sound that turned into a hacking cough. "The only doctor here is the one who brought this curse upon us. The Fang demon of the jungle. The furry plague-bringer." More doors opened, more fearful, sickly faces appeared. A woman clutching a child wrapped in a stained blanket pointed a trembling finger toward the jungle that loomed at the edge of the village. "The monster, it came from the sea," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of terror and hatred. "A beast covered in fur. After it arrived, the crimson rot began. It stalks the jungle, brewing its poisons, delighting in our suffering." Izuku and Alara exchanged a look. A furry monster causing a plague? It sounded like superstitious nonsense born from fear and grief. But these people believed it. Their xenophobia was a symptom of their desperation. "We don't want to disturb your village," Alara said, taking a more diplomatic approach. "Just point us to the old clinic or hospital, and we'll be on our way." The first man shook his head violently. "The demon makes its lair there. In the ruins of the old mission. It has claimed our medicine as its own. It guards it with tooth and claw. You go there, you die like the rest of us." With that, the door slammed shut. The other villagers disappeared back into their homes, the brief flicker of life in the village extinguished once more. "Well," Alara said, her hand resting on the hilt of her cutlass. "Looks like we're going monster hunting." The path to the old mission was treacherous and overgrown, the jungle floor a mulch of rotting leaves. The air grew thicker, heavy with the scent of countless strange flowers and herbs. It felt like walking through a giant, feverish lung. As they drew closer to the ruins, the smell of antiseptic and boiled herbs grew stronger, cutting through the jungle's decay. The mission was a crumbling stone structure, its roof long collapsed, allowing thick vines to snake down its walls. But the entrance to the main chapel had been cleared, and a clean, canvas tarp had been stretched over the doorway. It was a sign of recent, deliberate occupation. Izuku pushed the tarp aside and stepped inside. Alara followed, her cutlass drawn. The sight that greeted them was not a monster's den. It was a meticulously organized, if primitive, field hospital. The stone floor had been swept clean. Makeshift beds lined one wall, though they were all empty. A large stone altar in the center of the room had been converted into a workbench, covered with mortars and pestles, glass beakers, and carefully sorted piles of herbs, roots, and fungi. A fire pit in the corner had a large pot simmering over it, releasing a pungent, medicinal steam into the air, and in the center of it all, Her back to them, stood the monster. She was a creature Izuku had only read about in Alara's books. A mink. Specifically, she seemed to be a rabbit mink, with long, white, velvety ears that drooped with exhaustion, a fluffy cotton ball tail, and a coat of soft, white fur. She was dressed in a simple, practical doctor's tunic and trousers, though both were stained with dirt and herbal juices. Her entire being radiated a bone-deep weariness, yet her movements were precise and focused as she ground a dark root into a fine powder with a stone pestle. She must have heard them enter, because one of her long ears twitched, and she spun around, her eyes wide with alarm. She was young, not much older than them, with large, expressive brown eyes that were currently filled with fear and defiance. In her hand she held the heavy stone pestle like a club. "Stay back!" she warned, her voice trembling but determined. Her nose twitched nervously. "I won't let you destroy my work! These people need a cure!" Izuku immediately held his hands up, taking a slow step back to show he meant no harm. "We're not here to hurt you. We're not with the villagers." The mink's defensive posture didn't falter. "Everyone says that. Then the rocks start flying." Her eyes, red-rimmed from lack of sleep, darted between Izuku and Alara. "What do you want?" "Our friend is sick," Izuku explained, his voice gentle. "He was wounded by a poisoned blade. We're looking for a doctor." Are you a doctor?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her grip on the pestle loosened slightly. "I am," she said, a flicker of pride in her tired voice. "My name is Machi. Dr. Machi." She looked them over, her keen doctor's eyes assessing their healthy complexions. "You're not sick with the rot. What ship did you arrive on?" "The Saving Grace," Alara answered, slowly sheathing her cutlass. This exhausted, frightened young woman was the furthest thing from a demon she could imagine. "We docked about an hour ago. You need to leave," Dr. Machi said, her voice dropping to a whisper of urgent warning. "This island isn't safe. The Blight Pirates, they could return any day." "Blight Pirates?" Izuku asked. A fresh wave of anger and sorrow washed over Machi's face. "They're the ones who did this. They sailed into port 2 weeks ago. Their captain, Hemlock, ate a devil fruit. He can create a toxic mold, a sickness. They released it on the village, then left, promising to return to claim the island and its survivors as their slaves." Her ears drooped. "I arrived on a medical supply ship a few days later, on my way to the Grand Line. We found the village in the grip of the Crimson Rot. My shipmates, they panicked and abandoned me here." She gestured to the organized chaos of her workshop. "I've been here ever since, trying to synthesize a cure from the local flora. But the villagers, they saw me, a mink, and they saw the plague. They decided I was the cause. They think I'm some kind of witch, brewing poisons in the jungle. They've been hostile." Izuku's heart ached for her. She was stranded, abandoned, trying to save the very people who were persecuting her. It was a level of lonely heroism he understood all too well. "Dr. Machi," he said, his voice imbued with a sincere empathy that cut through her defenses. "Let us help you. You help our friend, and we'll help you finish this cure. Together, we can save everyone." Machi stared at him, her large brown eyes searching his face. She had been alone for so long, met only with fear and hatred. This stranger, this boy with the kind eyes and the ridiculous green costume, was offering help without condition, without suspicion. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her furry cheek. "Okay," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Okay." They brought Kaido to the makeshift clinic. Machi's professional demeanor took over the moment she saw him. Her gentle hands examined the wound with an expert touch, her twitching nose analyzing the scent of the infection. "It's a venom from the barbed sea slug," she diagnosed immediately, her ears perking up with focus. "Nasty stuff. Paralytic agents mixed with a flesh-rotting enzyme, but I have the ingredients for the antivenom here." She moved with a newfound energy, pulling specific jars of herbs and roots from her collection. As she worked, grinding and mixing, Alara told her about Izuku, his dream, and his strange devil fruit. Machi listened, her initial weariness replaced by a growing fascination. After treating Kaido's wound with a thick, pungent salve and forcing a bitter-tasting liquid down his throat, she declared that he would be stable for now, though the fever would take time to break. With the immediate crisis averted, she turned her attention back to the larger one. She led Izuku to a small, quarantined area in the back of the ruins where she was caring for two of the sickest villagers, an old man and a young boy she must have carried from the village herself. Their bodies were covered in a horrifying crimson rash that seemed to crawl across their skin, and their breathing was shallow and ragged. "This is the crimson rot," she said, her voice heavy. "It's a fungal infection. I've isolated the primary antifungal agent in the silverleaf root." She held up a pale, silvery root. "And the moonpetal flower seems to treat the respiratory symptoms." She indicated a delicate, white blossom. "But there's a third component, a binding agent or a catalyst, that I'm missing. Every combination I try fails. The fungus is too aggressive, it adapts. I'm just treating the symptoms, not curing the disease." Izuku looked at the sick villagers. He focused, activating his cozy no mi. The world shifted. To his perception, the sick villagers were shrouded in a chaotic, ugly aura. It was a jagged, crimson-colored pattern of light that pulsed erratically, like static on a screen. It was aggressive, disorganized, and deeply wrong. "Dr. Machi, can you prepare a solution of the silverleaf root?" he asked, his eyes not leaving the boy. Puzzled, she did as he asked, quickly grinding the root and mixing it with water. When she brought the poultice near the boy, Izuku saw a new pattern emerge from it, a calm, orderly, silver-blue lattice of light. When it touched the boy's skin, the silver-blue pattern tried to overlay the jagged crimson one. It suppressed it, calmed it, but the crimson static pushed back, breaking through the gaps in the lattice. "Now the moonpetal flower," he said. Machi prepared another solution. This one emitted a soft, pulsing, white gold pattern. When applied, it targeted a different aspect of the crimson static, soothing the most violent pulses but not dissolving the overall pattern. "It's not enough," Izuku murmured, his mind racing. He was seeing the disease and the medicines as interacting systems of energy, of patterns. Machi's cure was like a shield full of holes. "The crimson rot, its pattern is chaotic, but it has a core structure. A frequency. Your medicines disrupt it, but they don't cancel it out. We need something that inverts the pattern." He began to walk around Machi's workbench, his eyes scanning the dozens of sorted plants. He focused his ability on each one, seeing their unique energy patterns. There were greens of life, yellows of soothing agents, deep blues of sedatives. He was looking for a specific signature, a pattern that would fit perfectly into the gaps left by the silver leaf and moon petal. "It needs to be something with a stabilizing property, but also something sharp," he muttered to himself, his mind lost in a world of abstract shapes and colors. "Something that can pierce the core of the pattern and hold the other two together." His eyes landed on a small pile of crystalline, amber-colored sap that had been harvested from a type of ironwood tree. He hadn't noticed it before. When he focused on it, he saw it. Its pattern was a rigid, golden-orange grid, sharp and perfectly stable. "That," he said, pointing. "The sap. Its pattern is the inverse of the rot's core structure. It's the key. It will lock the other two patterns in place and create a perfect counter-frequency." Machi looked at the sap, then back at Izuku, her mouth slightly ageki. "The sunstone sap? I was using it as a simple topical sealant for wounds. I never would have thought to combine it." She worked with a feverish intensity now, guided by Izuku's strange, impossible perception. She ground the sap, carefully measuring the amount, and mixed it into the silver leaf and moon petal paste. As she stirred, Izuku watched the interacting patterns. "More silver leaf," he instructed. "The lattice needs to be denser, stop. A little more of the sap, perfect." The resulting paste was a shimmering, silvery poultice. When Izuku looked at it, he saw a new pattern. It was a perfect synthesis of the three, a complex but completely stable, interlocking pattern of silver, white, and gold light that hummed with a quiet, powerful energy. It was beautiful. It was the answer. Machi applied the new cure to the young boy's chest. The effect was instantaneous and miraculous. The calm, powerful pattern of the cure met the chaotic, crimson pattern of the disease. It didn't just suppress it, it unraveled it, dissolving the jagged static into nothingness. Within seconds, the angry red rash began to recede, and the boy's ragged breathing eased into a deep, peaceful sleep. Machi stared, her hands trembling. She looked from the sleeping child to the strange, green-haired boy who saw the world in a way she couldn't possibly comprehend. "You did it!" she whispered, tears of joy and relief streaming down her furry cheeks. "We did it!" Their celebration was cut short by a loud, booming voice from outside the ruins, amplified by a bullhorn. "Well, well, well! Look what we have here! The little rat doctor got herself some friends." Izuku and Elara rushed to the entrance. Standing at the edge of the jungle clearing was a group of pirates, at least 24 strong. They were a motley, unhealthy-looking crew, their skin pale and sallow. Their leader was a tall, gaunt man with greasy black hair and a cruel smile. He wore a long, tattered coat covered in patches of what looked like green and black mold. This was Captain Hemlock. "I am a generous man," Hemlock announced, his voice oozing false magnanimity. "My offer still stands. Surrender, become my loyal slaves, and I will spare you a slow, painful death from my crimson rot. My new crew is proof of my mercy." They all chose servitude over the rot. He gestured to his crew, who shuffled their feet, their eyes empty and hollow. "They're all infected," Machi said, her voice a low growl as she came to stand beside Izuku. "He's controlling them with the promise of a cure he'll never give them. We're not surrendering." Elara yelled back, drawing her cutlass. Hemlock sighed dramatically. "A pity. I was hoping to avoid getting my hands dirty." He raised a hand, and from his palm, a thick, blackish-green sludge began to ooze, spreading across the ground like a malevolent slime mold. It moved with an unnatural speed, killing the plant life it touched, leaving a trail of desiccated, rotting vegetation in its wake. This was the source of the plague. "The shiki no mi," Machi breathed, her fur bristling. "The damp fruit. Kill them!" Hemlock commanded. "But bring me the furry one. A talking rabbit would make a fine pet." The blight pirates charged, their movements sluggish but relentless. "Elara, Machi, get the cure and the sick villagers to safety," Izuku ordered, stepping forward. "I'll hold them off. Don't be an idiot, Deku!" Elara yelled. "There are too many of them." Just then, a blur of gray and silver shot past them. It was Kaido. He was on his feet, his fever still evident in the sheen of sweat on his brow, but his eyes were clear and his hand was steady on his katana. "A captain does not face the enemy alone," he said, his voice firm. He took a stance between Izuku and the charging pirates. The fight began. Kaido was a whirlwind of steel, his weakened state compensated for by his sheer, breathtaking skill. He moved with a purpose, disarming rather than killing the enslaved pirates, his blade a blur as he created a wall of defense. Elara, seeing the futility of arguing, nodded to Machi. "Let's move!" They began gathering the precious cure and helping the still weak villagers retreat deeper into the ruins. Izuku activated his power, his focus entirely on the battlefield. He became Kaido's eyes once more, calling out warnings. "Kaido, 3 on your right. The one in the middle has a hidden dagger." But his attention was drawn to Hemlock. The pirate captain wasn't engaging. He was laughing, spreading his toxic mold further, trying to corner them, to cut off their escape. Izuku knew that defeating the grunts meant nothing if the source of the power remained. He had to get to Hemlock. He dodged and weaved through the battle, using his perception to avoid the clumsy swings of the pirates. He saw the emerald lines of their intent, a chaotic scribble that was easy to navigate. He reached the edge of the encroaching mold. It radiated a foul, sickly pattern that made his head spin. Hemlock saw him coming and grinned, sending a wave of the toxic sludge directly at him. Izuku leaped back, the mold consuming the ground where he'd just been standing. He was fast, but the mold was faster. He was being herded. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from the ruins behind him. Machi stood there, her body crackling with golden electricity. Her soft, white fur was standing on end, and her eyes, once gentle and brown, now glowed with a fierce, electric power. The villagers and Elara were safely behind her. "You hurt people," she said, her voice no longer a timid whisper, but a low, dangerous growl. "You defiled the art of medicine. You twist life into sickness." She took a step forward, and sparks flew from her feet. I am a doctor! And a doctor's first duty is to do no harm, but their second, she said, her hands crackling as she balled them into fists, is to eradicate the disease. She launched herself forward, a bolt of white and gold lightning. The pirates who turned to face her were met with a stunning, paralyzing blast of electro. She moved with a speed that rivaled Ida's, her fists and feet discharging powerful electrical shocks that sent the enslaved pirates crashing to the ground, stunned but alive. She wasn't just a healer anymore. She was a warrior, inspired by Deku's courage to finally fight back. Her stunning entrance created the opening Izuku needed. With the pirates momentarily distracted, he focused all his perception on Hemlock. He saw it then. The mold wasn't just coming from Hemlock's hands. The pattern of the disease, the chaotic crimson static, was concentrated in a single point on Hemlock's chest, right over his heart. That was the source. His devil fruit's core. Hemlock, enraged by Machi's interference, sent a massive wave of mold at her. But Izuku was already moving. He ran along the wall of the ruin, vaulted over a fallen pillar, and launched himself into the air, directly at the pirate captain. The mold is weak against fresh, running water, Machi shouted, having clearly studied it. Izuku saw a stream running near the edge of the clearing. He didn't have to reach it. He just needed to use the knowledge. He landed, grabbed a discarded water skin from a fallen pirate, and hurled it at Hemlock's chest. The clean water struck the mold's core. The effect was like throwing water on a grease fire. The mold recoiled with a sizzling sound, the pattern of its energy flickering violently. Hemlock cried out in pain and surprise, clutching his chest. In that moment of weakness, Izuku struck. He didn't have one for all, but he had his own strength, honed by weeks of relentless training. He put all his weight and momentum into a single, focused punch, not aimed at Hemlock's head or stomach, but at the exact spot over his heart where he had seen the devil fruit's core. The punch connected with a solid thud. Hemlock gasped, the wind knocked out of him. The chaotic pattern of the mold shattered like glass. The creeping sludge all around the clearing instantly dissolved, turning into a harmless, inert powder that was carried away on the breeze. The pirate captain's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed unconscious. His crew, freed from the immediate influence of his power and the desperation of their sickness, stopped fighting, looking around in a dazed confusion. The battle was over. In the aftermath, a strange sense of peace settled over the clearing. Machi, with Alara's help, began administering the cure to the blight pirates, who accepted it with tears of gratitude. Kaido, leaning on his sword, watched Izuku with a newfound level of respect. Later, after the blight pirates were tied up and their ship secured, the crew returned to the village. They brought the cure with them. The villagers, seeing the healthy boy who had been at death's door, and hearing the story from the old man Machi had saved, were stunned into silence. The man with the pitchfork, who had first confronted them, was the first to step forward. He approached Machi, his face a mixture of shame and awe. He dropped to his knees. We were wrong," he stammered, his voice thick with emotion. The other villagers followed his lead, bowing their heads. "You saved us. The monster was us. Can you forgive us?" Machi looked at the fearful people she had worked so hard to save. She saw not malice in their faces, but ignorance and terror. She, the outcast, offered them a gentle, forgiving smile. "There is nothing to forgive," she said. "Let's just get you all healthy." That evening, the saving grace was ready to depart. The ship was fully stocked with fresh water and food, gifts from the eternally grateful villagers. Kaido's fever had broken, the antivenom working its magic. Machi stood on the dock, watching them. She had done what she set out to do. She had a cure, and the villagers were safe. She was free to wait for the next ship. But the thought of being alone again, of facing a world that so often met her with prejudice, was a heavy one. Izuku walked down the gangplank and stood before her. "The ship's doctor has her own cabin now," he said, his voice soft. "It's small, but it has a good view of the sea. There's a space for all your medical books. If you want it." He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her a home. Machi looked at the ship, at Alara leaning on the railing with a rare, welcoming smile, at Kaido giving her a respectful nod. She looked at Izuku, the boy who had seen not a monster, but a doctor, and had offered his help without a moment's hesitation. She had left her home on Zo to see the world and practice her medicine, but she had been met with fear. Here, with this strange little crew, she had found acceptance. She had found a family. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time, they were purely of joy. I think, she said, a wide, happy smile spreading across her face, her long ears perking up with excitement, that the hero pirates are in desperate need of a proper doctor.